Genesis chapter 4, story of Cain and Abel. Then Adam had intercourse with his wife, and she became pregnant. She bore a son and said, "By the Lord's help I have acquired a son." So she named him Cain. Later she gave birth to another son, Abel. Abel became a shepherd, but Cain was a farmer. After some time, Cain brought some of his harvest and gave it as an offering to the Lord. Then Abel brought the first lamb born to one of his sheep, killed it, and gave the best parts of it as an offering. And the Lord was pleased with Abel and his offering, but he rejected Cain and his offering. Cain became furious, and he scowled in anger. But then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why that scowl on your face? If you had done the right thing, you would be smiling. But because you have done evil, sin is crouching at your door. It wants to rule you, but you must overcome it." Then Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out in the fields." And when they were out in the fields, Cain turned on his brother and killed him. And the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He answered, "I don't know. Am I supposed to take care of my brother?" Then the Lord said, "Why have you done this terrible thing? Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground like a voice calling for revenge. You are placed under a curse and can no longer farm the soil. It has soaked up your brother's blood, as if it had opened its mouth to receive it when you killed him. If you try and grow crops, the soil will not produce anything. You will be a homeless wanderer on the earth." And Cain said to the Lord, "This punishment is too hard for me to bear. You are driving me out of the land and away from your presence. I will be a homeless wanderer on the earth, and anyone who finds me will kill me." But the Lord answered, "No. If anyone kills you, 7 lives will be taken in revenge." So the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who met him not to kill him. And Cain went away from the Lord's presence and lived in a land called Wandering, which is east of Eden. So we continue with Genesis. We come across this famous or infamous great passage. And if you want a heading for this passage, it is things going from bad to worse, really. We are aware that at the beginning of the Bible, we have the setting for the fall of mankind. At the beginning of the Bible, we have a sense that man is not right with God. We have that pictured in Adam and Eve. And sin is rebellion against God, disobedience. And it leads above all to alienation. We find that they're not at peace with themselves. They don't get on between themselves. They don't get on with their environment anymore. It's all very bad news. So when we get to the second generation, you can see things going from bad to worse. And you'll all recognize in your own lives that things do go from bad to worse. And you think, "Oh my gosh, I thought that was bad, and I thought that was bad enough. And now this has gone on and rumbled on, and perhaps in a relationship, perhaps with money, perhaps with your job, perhaps with anything really. It goes from bad to worse." You can trace this just very quickly in this story. This alienation, this getting further and further away and getting worse and worse and worse. And so these two brothers are not close. One is a farmer and the other one is a keeper of animals and sheep and cattle and all this sort of thing. Historically, in the ancient times, the herders and the tillers do not get on at all. In some ways, the herders have always driven their cattle, their sheep, and their camels all over the fields of the farmers. There's always been a division here. When they come to worship, as the commentator says, we have 2 altars. They're going to worship God, but they're not going to worship God together. So one gives a bit of an offering and another, and one offering is okay, and the other, for very good reason, which we're not sure of, is not okay. Perhaps the motive, perhaps his heart, or whatever it was, is not accepted. He is ballistic And Cain will not have it at all. He won't have it with God. He won't have it with his goody-goody brother. He's ballistic. And God warns him, but he takes no notice. They go out in the fields. He thinks it through. Let's go out in the fields. He kills his brother. What a disaster. It gets even worse. He hasn't got a brother at all now. He hasn't even got a brother not to like. And then he's driven out into this nowhereness, really, east of Eden. Now, that sense of we are not close, but we could be even less close. This sense in which we are condemned, I suppose, by our own actions to be alienated from ourselves and from one another and from God, is even in the very small things of life, is important when we feel alone. And on a day like this, we only got to think of the way that nations and whole groups of nations have done exactly the same thing. And it's gone from bad words to bad actions to disasters. If you look at this in a bit more detail, look at Abel, who's the nicer guy. I think with these two men, although you might say I identify with Abel or identify with Cain, in some ways there's a bit of each in both of them. There's a bit of ego and alter ego and whatever. They have traits in all of our lives from both people that characterize it. But the better of the two, Abel, it tells us, if nothing else, that being able to worship God in an imperfect world. We're not in Eden anymore. He's not wandering around the garden with God in peace. He has to have an altar and a sacrifice. It's not right, but there is a possibility of worshipping God. But even although God is pleased with him, that doesn't save him from being killed. Just because somebody trusts in God does not mean that they're going to be okay for the whole of their lives. We need to hear that. God does protect us at times. Does God care for us? And in the long term, we are secure. But in a fallen world, bad people do bad things. And God does not say, well, you trust me, so no bad people are going to do any bad things to you. This does not happen. We need to get hold of this when it happens to loved ones, that we are not totally resentful and say to God, oh, I'm not having any more of this then. Abel's sacrifice was received and God was pleased. And Abel finishes up dead. It's not that God doesn't take an interest. God seeks to save him by talking to Cain, but Cain still kills him. And then his blood cries out from the earth, very strong, for vengeance. And so often we, without being melodramatic, we want justice. We want something to be put right. How should this have been allowed to happen to us or one of our loved ones? I think it's very strong, again, looking behind us today into the big sphere of remembrance and looking at, as we have done on the television in these years, of anniversaries of some of these enormous cemeteries. Like from the Battle of the Somme and what have you, row upon row upon row of graves. The sense their blood cries out from the ground is very strong. Whether for vengeance, certainly for justice. Perhaps then you are in a position where you felt unjustly put upon. Things have not worked out as you thought. And you cry out for justice or for vengeance. Mind you, Cain, who's the worst of the two, turns out to be the survivor. Well, that's ironic, isn't it? And Cain is tempted because we don't know why his sacrifice wasn't good enough. As I say, it could be attitude, we don't know. God doesn't need to give us an explanation. Perhaps Cain knew that he wasn't right, but perhaps he wasn't sure. But whatever it was, he's pretty angry about it. There's that temptation to break even further from his brother he didn't like anyway. And with God, and huge, we are always vulnerable to temptation. We are never perfect with anybody. And in a fallen world, there's always that temptation to make it worse. And the way it involves the whole of your life, he says, and he was very angry, and he looked angry. It says in the sort of in the text, it says, he walked with a scowl, sort of thing. That's good, it's holistic. I'm not happy on the outside and angry on the inside. My whole self is taken over. And God says to him, what are you looking like this for? You know? Isn't that like that with us? And God warns him. He says, look, up until now, he says, temptation, this is really temptation, like a beast scraping at the door. But you mustn't let it go any further. You must master it. So he warns him. God warns us about temptation and sin. And often we'll say, this is temptation, when we thought it was sin. He doesn't say, right, you're going to be punished for being angry. He said, you could put this right now. You could put it right. I think it's a really important thing for us to hear that, to God to flag it up and say, watch where this is going. Come on, this has gone far enough. And to say quite firmly that. This is not God is not like a school teacher in a junior school these days who sees that Cain is a bit grumpy and says, oh, there, Cain, your sacrifice was really very nice. You did very well. All the children did very well, that sort of thing. God is not like that. He says, it's not good. But, as well as warning him, he said, were you to do right, the Hebrew says, you could lift up your head. Rather than all this, what a great thing, you could lift up your head. He said, you don't have to go any further. This doesn't have to go any further. But then, he doesn't force him to be good. And Cain goes on, and he organises a little trip out into his fields, and he turns and he kills his brother. Terrible. And it's just, he's blown it, hasn't he? He's blown it. And you know that situation where you've been angry about something, you've been tempted, it's been brewing, and then you blow it. You make the speech that destroys it all, you know. And it's never going to be, it's a terrible business, you know. Or you break something in bad temper and you can't glue it back together again. Or whatever it is, something goes badly wrong and you've blown it. And he's blown it. Not only does he have no brother, but he is cast out again from his land. He's cast out to be a wanderer. It's the name of the land he's put into, to be a wanderer. And for a man who needed land, to be a wanderer is a disaster, isn't it? But what is the real biggest disaster is the end of it all? Is that he's not actually sorry that he killed his brother. At the end of it, he's sorry that he's been punished. There's all this, oh, poor me. But the end of it is, I can't stand this. This is all too much. He's just left with a bit of remorse and a bit of self-pity. So much for the survivors. The blood of one cries out for vengeance and the other one cries over spilt milk. We could be in either category, in very small ways. Our world is in either category. Either those who have died through war cry out to us for justice, or the survivors are broken and wanderers and alienated. And you wonder actually who won this war. We as a nation are wanderers. We don't know. We used to have an empire, we haven't got one. We used to have a commonwealth, we've just about got one. We are a nation who's lost a role. We don't know who we are. It can be like that with us. There are no winners in a war. So where does God stand with us as individuals and behind us with a nation such as ours? Well, you see that God doesn't give up on people. Although Adam and Eve had been bad, things were not as they should be, God is still available. God can still be worshipped. They still have an altar. They can still bring sacrifices. Well, that's good. God is there to warn as well, to say to you and me, this does not need to go any further. Next time you are boiling up, next time you... Do you hear God saying, hang on, that's enough? Perhaps it's a conscience, perhaps it's a word, perhaps it's somebody else, perhaps it's a spirit speaking to your hearts. He doesn't say, I can see this is just going badly wrong, but I'll leave them to it. He says, come on! What are you looking like this for? Were you to do right, you could lift your head. There is a different way. Master this. It's your responsibility. You haven't fallen for this sin yet. This is just temptation. Master it. Come on. And in the New Testament he said, I will help you. But he is not going to make you good. He is not going to force you to do good. And when it all goes badly wrong and there is the blood and there is the crying over the spilt milk and the alienation, God still has the last word. This is the best thing in this whole story. God has the last word. The blood is crying out for vengeance, but God says, vengeance is mine, not yours. I will deal with Cain as I choose. And Cain is crying, oh, this is all too much for me. I will deal with you as I choose. And what I choose to do is I put my mark on you, not to make you guilty, but to make you safe. It's a like God saying, this person is definitely messed up, but this person still belongs to me. Do not touch this person. As we said last week, this is the golden thread of salvation through the whole Bible. However bad we make it, God holds on to us. Don't touch this man. And so thousands of years later, when Jesus Christ comes, he says, this person is not touched because I am going to save them. This morning is a morning for the good news of Jesus Christ, for the gospel. That he comes to save, to put a different mark on us, a mark of ownership through the Holy Spirit, as St. Paul says. That we can be reborn, we can be remade, we can be breaking out of the mess that we're in, we can be regenerate, that there is hope in Jesus because God hangs in there, puts his mark on, does not give up, does not despair. So whoever we are, wherever we are this morning, we might be thinking, I'm disillusioned. I trusted God and it didn't work. I trusted my brother and he killed me. I'm disillusioned. And God says, I'll deal with this. I'll deal with this. Or we could be thinking in other ways, I've blown it, but I'm angry about myself. I'm angry with myself. I'm angry about being angry. And now I'm angry about everything that's happened from it. And God says, I will touch you and I will change you. And I will bring you to a new thing. And rather than being vengeful and rather than just being remorseful, we need to be sorry and be forgiven and restored. You do that this morning. It's something very small. It's easy to lose your individuality on a Remembrance Sunday when we're thinking about the nation. We're all people. But for the nations of the world, as the blood of those who have died cries out to us, we need to be peacemakers. When we are restored, we can be peacemakers and reconcilers. When we are brought close to God again, we can lift our heads. Then we can bring one another close together. We can reconcile in our families, in our communities, in our relationships, and as a nation, a force for good and reconciliation. So that very ancient story, where the blood cries out, where the despair comes, God puts his mark on it. Don't touch this person. This belongs to me. He says to you, I put my mark on you. You belong to me. You might be in a hole, but I will wring you out.